Hello everyone and welcome to Module 10 where we're going to talk about embodiment and self-regulation. Your learning objectives are going to be to give examples of how socioeconomic factors get under the skin and also to describe self-regulation interventions that patients can use to stay healthy when facing adversity. So embodiment is a fairly new term that was first coined in the 1990s in social epidemiology as a bridging concept referring to the interplay of society and the body. It recognizes that humans are simultaneously social beings and biological organisms, and the notion of embodiment advances three critical claims. It states that bodies tell stories about and cannot be studied divorced from the conditions of our existence. Bodies tell stories that often, but not always, match people's stated accounts, and that bodies tell stories that people cannot or will not tell, either because they are unable, forbidden, or choose not to tell. So, for example, food insecurity, inadequate sanitation, economic and social deprivation, physical and sexual abuse, toxic exposures, and inadequate healthcare all leave their marks on the body, as does the opposite. The security of a living wage, pensions for old age, societal support for childcare, universal sanitation, safe workplaces, universal healthcare and immunizations. All of these affect our health, disease, and well-being. This is really how culture gets under the skin. So we have to remember that we are biological organisms and members of a biological species. So organism refers to a living system, and all known types of organisms are capable of some degree of response to stimuli, reproduction, growth and development, and homeostasis. The biological species concept defines a species as members of populations that actually or potentially interbreed in nature, not according to similarity of appearance. Although appearance is helpful in identifying species, it does not define species. We are also social beings and members of society. As social beings, we live in companionship with others or in a community rather than isolation. Society is a group of people involved in persistent social interaction or a large social grouping sharing the same geographical or social territory, typically subject to same political authority and dominant cultural experiences. There is an interplay between the two. We are able to respond to changes in society. Biological embedding is a process by which experience gets under the skin and alters human biology and development. Systematic differences in experiences in different social environments lead to different biological and developmental outcomes. These in turn influence health, well-being, learning, and behavior over the life course. You remember from our previous lectures that heart disease, diabetes, obesity, depression, substance abuse, school success, premature mortality, disability, aging, and memory loss all have social determinants in early life. Social partitioning is commonly equated with socioeconomic status differences. The influence of a socially partitioned world on human development is expressed early in the form of gradients in key domains of child development in the first few years of life. The factors associated with these gradients are well recognized and can be aggregated into three groups from the child: the microenvironment, the mesoenvironment, and the macroenvironment. Opportunities for biological embedding are tethered closely to sensitive periods in the development of neural circuitry. Epigenetic regulation that we explored in the previous module is the best example of operating principles relevant to biological embedding. An example about the brain is that early sensory stimulation activates specific genes in different parts of the brain to differentiate neuron functions and establish sensory pathways. Sensory pathways in turn influence the development of neural pathways to other parts of the brain involved in coping, movement, language, cognition, and biological pathways, including the immune and hormone systems. So to give an example of biological embedding, I'm going to talk about the biological effects of stress. The sympathoadrenal medullary system is a stress pathway involved with acute stress. This is when the higher brain centers have evaluated a situation to be stressful, which triggers the hypothalamus, which in turn activates the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. This then triggers the adrenal medulla to release adrenaline and noradrenaline into the bloodstream to provide us with energy. When this branch has been activated, we see such symptoms as increased heart rate, heavier and faster rate of respiration, and sweaty palms. The other bodily response is called the pituitary adrenal pathway, and this deals with chronic stress. Once the brain centers are alarmed to stress in the pathway, the hypothalamus triggers the pituitary gland, which releases ACTH into the bloodstream to stimulate the adrenal cortex to release a substance known as cortisol in the bloodstream. The function of cortisol is to maintain a steady supply of blood sugar for continued energy, and this enables the body to cope with the stressors. So we can use this information to examine the effects of stress on embodiment. So how do we measure the effects of embodiment? Remember in the previous lecture we talked about biomarkers. Biomarkers offer a measure to track individual exposures as well as the impact of exposures. They reflect individual vulnerability and ongoing person-environment interaction. Essentially, a biomarker is a measurable feature that taps into the pathways linking a health outcome to the factors that influence it, and you can read about this in the Worthman study. It is important to remember that the selected biomarker needs to reflect the outcome or what you're interested in measuring. So in the Worthman article, they described the Great Smoky Mountains study. This was a longitudinal study of approximately 1,400 children, and they collected repeated measures data on mental and physical health, life events, household conditions, in addition to biological biomarkers. So they decided to use cortisol as a biomarker for chronic stress. They used Epstein-Barr virus as a marker of ongoing psychological stress and cell-mediated immune function, since the higher the titer, the greater the level of ongoing stress-related immunocompromise. And they also chose to use C-reactive protein. And CRP indexes systemic burden and predicts the risk of cardiovascular disease at least 15 years into the future by reflecting ongoing inflammatory response to cardiovascular wear and tear. So the important takeaway from this study is that the body often can tell us what we need to know about psychological, sociological, or cultural factors previously observed only through other means such as questionnaires or population statistics. We now have physiological or biological link explaining a phenomenon. Some other words that you're going to run into in your readings are allostasis and allostatic load. These two concepts can help researchers understand how health trajectories are influenced by stressful childhood experiences in the family. Spending one's early life in chronically stressful environments, particularly those in which episodes of anger and aggression recur and relationships are cold, unsupportive, and neglectful, has damaging psychological and biological effects that are ultimately manifested in the mental and physical health of adults. One of the key pathways based on the allostatic load model posits that regulatory systems for adapting to challenges through neural, neuroendocrine, and neuroendocrine immune mechanisms are repeatedly stimulated in these family settings, which then disrupts the ability to mount an effective response to stress and to quickly recover from those responses in the future, and this all contributes to the allostatic load. Allostasis does refer to the adaptive processes that maintain homeostasis through the production of mediators such as adrenaline, cortisol, and other chemical messengers. Allostatic load, on the other hand, is really the wear and tear on the body, which grows over time when the individual is exposed to repeated or chronic stress. It represents the physiological consequences of chronic exposure to fluctuating or heightened neural or neuroendocrine responses that result from repeated or chronic stress. Remember, we can measure cortisol levels. So, for example, in the McEwen article, perception of stress is influenced by one's experiences, genetics, and behavior. When the brain perceives an experience as stressful, physiologic and behavioral responses are initiated, leading to allostasis and adaptation, which is a good thing. But over time, allostatic load can accumulate, and the overexposure to neural, endocrine, and immune stress mediators can have adverse effects on various organ systems, leading to disease. So what can we do about this? Brain plasticity refers to the brain's ability to change throughout life. So gray matter can actually shrink or thicken. Neural connections can be forged and refined or weakened and severed. Changes in the physical brain manifest as changes in our abilities. For example, each time we learn a new dance step, it reflects a change in our physical brains, new wires or neural pathways that give instructions to our bodies on how to perform the step. Each time we forget someone's name, it also reflects a brain change. These are neural pathways that once connected to the memory have been degraded or even severed. As these examples show, changes in the brain can result in improved skills or a weakening of skills. Much of this happens through epigenetics. Your DNA changes continuously based on your experiences, emotions, and environment. In the McEwen article, they talk about the brain is the central organ of stress and adaptation. The social environment as well as the physical environment have powerful effects on the body and the brain through the neuroendocrine, autonomic, and immune systems. What can be done to remediate the effects of chronic stress as well as the biological embedding associated with early life adversity? Interventions may involve pharmaceuticals as well as behavioral interventions. These could include cognitive behavioral therapy, physical activity, and programs that promote social support and integration and meaning and purpose in life. Social interaction and support and finding meaning and purpose in life are known to be predictive against dementia. So it is never too late to learn a new skill due to our brain plasticity. Another thing you can think about is self-regulation. This is a universal set of skills that helps us manage our responses to things that happen in our lives. We have very little control over the events that happen around us, but we have a great deal of control over our responses to those events. Those of you that are interested in reading more about self-regulation, I encourage you to look up articles written by Albert Bandura. He states that the conception of health is shifting from a disease model to a health model. It emphasizes health promotion rather than mainly disease management. The quality of health is heavily influenced by lifestyle habits. This enables people to exercise some measure of control over the state of their health. To stay healthy, people should exercise, reduce dietary fat, refrain from smoking, keep blood pressure down, and develop effective ways of managing stressors. By managing their health habits, people can live longer, healthier, and retard the process of aging. These include self-monitoring of health-related behavior, adoption of goals to guide one's efforts and strategies for realizing them, and self-reactive influences that include enlistment of self-motivating incentives and social supports to sustain healthful practices. But you have to remember that the environment in which people live needs to be conducive for them to be able to implement self-regulation methods. So embodiment refers to how culture and society gets under skin by changing biology, most often through the mechanism of epigenetics. And self-regulation is an intervention that individuals can employ when exposed to a stressful situation. So for your discussion for this week, I want you to think about your patient population and give 2 examples of self-regulation interventions you can provide them so that they can improve the health outcome you're interested in improving. Thank you.